Hello everyone, good morning, and welcome to the Boutique Hotels Crisis Guide to Food and Beverage produced by BLLA. We know a lot of you out there have lots of questions, and that's great. Please put them into the Q&A slot on Zoom. We probably won't be able to get to them today, however, we will send the panelists these questions and we'll try to get through as much as we can. But questions are very important because we want to know what you think as well. We wanted to go through a quick introduction of BLLA, the producers of this webinar series. We're the official association for the world's boutique lifestyle leaders. We're also the original hub supporting boutique and independent hotels since 2009, actually technically 2003. And our values are leadership, advocacy, and education. We've been advocating for boutique hotels for so long, and to continue our efforts, we do ask our audience to follow these guidelines. One, we do have a YouTube channel that we please ask you to subscribe to. We're going to have our webinar recordings on there. We're going to have some tactical resource, boot camp style videos on there. Please subscribe. As many of you know, we've produced a lot of conferences, so our YouTube page will take the place of that for now. Also, all of you who have signed up for this webinar, you are now getting our newsletters. We're not here to spam you, we're here to inform you. So for that, please add news, sorry, with an S, NEWS at boutiqueweekly.com to your primary inbox to make sure that you do receive those emails. And last but not least, we're soon going to be launching a worldwide campaign to spread awareness for boutique. However, in the meantime, please use these two hashtags, hashtag boutique strong and hashtag save boutique hotels. We're going to be doing some big things with those two hashtags very soon here. But now more than ever, we need your support. BLLA is the boutique sector's voice, and we want to come out of this as a community stronger together. So we've always been a family, and that's how we've always built our association and all of our events, our members, and anyone involved in boutique. You can see a picture here of our 10-year anniversary last year. It was so fun, and we look at everyone in the boutique community as family. So with that, I'm gonna give it over to our amazing moderator, David, who will get us started for today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Boutique Hotels Crisis Guide to Food and Beverage, produced by the BLLA. We have an amazing panel and a fantastic webinar for you, full of information for the boutique sector. I think it'd be great to have the panelists introduce themselves, give a little background, and let's start with Julia, please.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Julia Heyer. I'm the founder and managing director of Higher Performance. We focus on food and beverage strategies to deliver to top line, bottom line brand visibility, depending on the client's priorities. Our clients are mostly real estate owners. They're often in the hotel and the boutique hotel space, multi-use space, often unusual spaces, private clubs, and so forth, but usually, or very often, unusual and spaces and programs in that sense. So, you know, whether it's a boutique hotel working on in Florida, one in Dayton, Peloton, Harvard Club, Guinness Brewery, sort of runs the gamut. So that's what we work on, and I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. And Stephen?
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name's Stephen Kamali. I'm a founder of Hospitality House. We are based in New York. Our team is made up of 28 professionals, both in New York and London. We focus on the development of food and beverage concepts, often within hotels across the US and Europe. We are thrilled to be a part of this organization and being able to advocate on behalf of food and beverage within the hotel space, and look forward to the dialogue.
Fantastic. And Jody?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Jody Pennette, and we started CB5 Hospitality 23 years ago, just when the boutique genre was evolving, and got to work with many of the founding visionaries. So I've been able to, over the years, cultivate an understanding and appreciation for the culture. And we specialize in developing creative food and beverage, mostly for the boutique sector, but for the entire hospitality industry.
Awesome. And Jay.
Hello, and thank you all for having me. I'm Jay Coldren. I'm the Managing Director for the Hospitality and Drink Division at Streetsense. Streetsense is a creative collective of about 200 individuals out of Washington, D.C. Our division and our studio focuses on boutique and luxury and lifestyle product throughout the world. We have offices in LA, New York, Madrid, and Washington, D.C. And for the past 30 years, I've been in the boutique segment for the most part, as an operator for the first 15 years, and then beyond that as a boutique hotel developer, and now as a consultant. And delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic, and thank you all for joining. I want to jump right in with what's going on with the current operations. So, Julie, if you want to start us off talking about clients you have that are offering delivery, if they're doing takeout or curbside, if that includes a full menu, a limited menu, and if alcohol is able to be picked up or delivered as well.
So there's really, everybody sort of that we've worked with has made it through what I call the triage stage of the last 2.5 to 3 weeks. The majority of operations that we've talked to, most of them have shut down because the ones that have remained open, they're usually doing some version of delivery, family meals, sort of specialty items, and they've gotten pretty creative about what packages to offer based on the markets they're in. And their objectives usually, this isn't a time to make money. The reason most people are continuing to operate is because they're trying to do everything they can to keep their staff and to keep as much of their staff as possible. And in our reasons, it's not just because there's the aspect that in our industry is really very family oriented, in food and beverage and restaurants especially, that you want to take care of each other. There's also the aspect of nobody knows really how long this is going to go. When people are out of work, it's not just the question of what happens to their livelihood, it's also what happens when you're ready to reopen and all your staff is now working somewhere else and you have to start at zero. So there's these considerations of wanting to take care of your staff as well as wanting to sort of not, put yourself in a deeper hole than this is already creating. In terms of offering, the change in liquor license law in New York was very beneficial and really helpful to people. So you see everything from cocktail packaging. People are doing really well. They're doing dinner baskets, sort of prepared items, really segueing into the home meal replacement segment that you often had seen come out of supermarkets and gourmet markets. More so also to sort of figure out how to do an appealing offering at an appealing price point, because it's not just that part of the competitive landscape is changing. It's also, the consumers is having concerns as well about what do I want to spend, where do I want to spend it, who do I support, and so forth. So it's been pretty interesting to see the type of offerings people have put together to sort of keep the doors open, and or near hospitals there's a lot of support of those communities going on, but most people we've spoken to, everybody's down. This is not something where suddenly somebody's having a big field day, especially if they're working with third-party delivery services, which are really problematic in many capacities.
That's true. Stephen, what's your experience been with your clients and being able to offer takeout or delivery just to keep the doors open and pay the employees?
So as far as our clients go, often our clients are either hotel owners on the public and the private side, so whether it be REITs, private equity firms, and funds, closed-end funds. So I think our communication with them has really been about their shutdown of the hotel business. So we averted our attention to effectively what we find to be content within our network, which is restaurants, which is really the lifeblood of how we find the boutique hotel owners are obviously circling around and trying to be supportive of that. So our focus really shifted to the restaurant industry. We developed 2.5 weeks ago, very quickly, we set up a network by the name of the Restaurant Network. It's today made up of 4,000 business owners across the US. And within that organization, we've set up quite a few different channels for people to be able to communicate with one another and to assist one another. We've engaged the help of attorneys, accountants, politicians, and lobbyists. And throughout that time, we've publicized this network throughout a variety of different social media channels, as well as the print media. And we found much success through that. And we've voiced our concerns to all levels of government at this point. So we're in active discussions with not only the lobbyists on the real estate end, but as well as our community leaders, whether that be senators, congressmen, state representatives, and at the city level, the mayor's office. What we're learning about is that obviously the community of restaurant owners need one another to be able to support each other through this trying time. And being able to gain each other's insights has been profoundly helpful. We're also looking to provide them with alternative lenders outside of what we're finding within the stimulus bill, so that they can obviously gain some footing in that manner. We've also arranged a number of legal help on the insurance end to see if we were able to help them in establishing business interruption insurance, which hasn't yet been achieved at all, but it's something that we're striving for day in and day out. Ultimately, what we find the restaurant network to be is, though, a forum in which restaurateurs can come together and help one another. And for us to be able to give them that platform has been great. Arguably, I would tell you to your question, David, we have found that nearly half of the businesses are closed, and they are offering both pickup and delivery. Unfortunately, suppression of sales is still about 75%, which doesn't assist naturally the bottom line in any way, shape, or form. So listen, naturally, I think that they will continue to do so because they feel as though they're serving their community, they're serving their staff. But ultimately, I think it's really for themselves, for the hope that they're going to be able to come back fighting and open another day. And so we remain hopeful, and we continue to wake up and assist them the best we can. And we look to the future, and we're hopeful that eventually things will come back to order.
Jay, is this your experience as well? The clients that you have, are they mostly closed or all of them closed?
Yeah, I mean, I think our people are, the clients that we're working with right now, a lot of them are on the development cycle. So a lot of things that in development in the hotel side are still moving forward, though somewhat more tentatively and more carefully. But the partners that we work with that are, in operation right now, I would say the majority of them are closed. We do have a couple of really interesting bright spots. We work with the Columbia Room here in DC, and they're doing, curbside cocktail packages and snacks and things. And we have some of our sort of more fine dining clients on the upper end doing, 2 or 3 day meal kits for people and, delivered sanitarily to the back of your car. And, one of the people we work with is doing a grocery store out of their restaurant. So there's a lot of innovation in it, but I think to everyone's point, it's really about keeping people motivated, keeping people doing something, and keeping people on top of mind right now. It's not, I don't think anyone is dramatically changing the business model, though everybody really wants to know what to do and what's next and, what's going to happen. So I think we're getting a lot of questions about that, and we're sort of putting together our own little triage kit for everyone we work with on here's some ways to think about coming out of this.
Which I think we're definitely going to touch on in a moment. But Jody, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your clients and what you're seeing.
Well, most of our clients have closed or they're on, a very limited pulse with F&B. I think one of the reasons is that the freestanding restaurant has the agility to maybe adapt quickly with a takeout delivery program. It's not as easy as it sounds, and we talked about it a bit the other day. The packaging, the third-party conveyance, if it is done, as Julia mentioned, to retain the asset, the staff of a boutique hotel, I think it's certainly worthy to try everything because the boutique sector in particular really relies on the nuance and the cachet of their team to impart that emotional connection to the guest that everyone's looking for. And quite frankly, a boutique hotel without its F&B operation probably feels a little impotent. It's a big part of the touch point for the guest, and it helps to create the verve. As far as delivery goes, I've been developing delivery concepts for a while, just coincidentally, and they're very complex, and I think it's probably too short term for someone to completely adapt their machinery to provide it well. I think if it becomes a byproduct of this event as a incremental start of business to enhance sales, it could be a permanent measure for hotels. But right now, most of our clients are focused on what our next steps are. In the boutique sector, we get access to owners typically. So you get the visionaries and the people who are concerned and planning their next step of reopening and how that works. And most of the focus has been on development and how to hit the ground running as soon as we get the green light.
So let's go with that. What is the best advice for preparing now to hit the ground when, you know, the proverbial all clear is given and restaurateurs and boutique hotel operators can open their doors again for full service?
No, I can jump in a little bit. I mean, what we're advising our clients is that, you know, what we're seeing in Macau and across the globe, it's not an immediate, you know, everybody jumping back in the pool. And you got to be really careful with your capital. You got to make sure that whatever, you know, funding that you get, you hold on to. Nobody really knows how this is going to peter out and end. So I think that the sort of idea that this is going to be in 3 months just back online, just as it was before, I think there's a lot of paranoia hitting the market, and people are going to be a little bit more concerned about being in high, you know, energy packed in spaces like nightclubs or food halls. There's going to be a lot of residual kind of worry. People have not been infected. So we're real careful with our clients talking about capital management, being in this for the long term and making sure that, you know, whatever happens, there's a way forward, even if things, you know, regress slightly, or if there's another sort of outbreak or more social distancing measures put into place, because really nobody knows right now.
I think also the boutique sector, its mojo is based on that staff interaction. So as much as they can get the, you know, the power plant going, I think if they lose some of their talent, there's going to be a need to very early on start building the culture, maybe from some key people who can impart it on others. But the verve and the alchemy of running a boutique hotel is going to be an important consideration beyond the rest of the industry, which is probably more fundamental in startup. And hotels typically are not quick to react to things. There's a lot of meetings about the meetings. And so to get into it on a visceral level, I think the training, the retraining, and the cultivation of the staff needs to be run. It can start sooner than maybe the all clear, because as long as you have some access to the people that were working for you, and it may be a good way to keep a tether to them to maintain dialogue while we wait this out.
And also,
So
I think
our feedback has been a little bit, excuse me, go ahead. No, please, Julia. So our feedback has been a little bit different. I think we've averted the attention away from full service restaurants nearly entirely. We believe that the suppression sales, when they do open, we think that nearly 25% of the restaurants across the country will be closed. Our assumption is that more than half will be closed in major markets. So when we think about the food and beverage space as it applies to boutique hotels, generally our sense is that we need to start to focus our attention towards cloud kitchens, focus on pickup and delivery, and for there to be a diversification of cuisine type from the kitchen, and giving people access to fun and interesting food, but definitively in a different environment. And I think to discuss how service level is going to change and when people are going to come back online, I think until such time that there's an ability to ensure that everybody in the room that you're sharing a meal with, or at the same time, once you're able to ensure that they're healthy, until such time, we don't think that there's going to be success at any level. And so we are looking to many of our clients and advising them to repurpose their existing kitchen space, banquet facilities and otherwise, into cloud kitchens. Obviously not a novel idea as of yet, but the reality is we don't think it's been done on a national scale. So that's a big part of what we're discussing. We think that in-room dining through this period of time is something that's going to have quite a bit of a revolution, in the sense that it's often been a small percentage of the capture that you'd find in your guests. But we think that that's going to grow dramatically. We also think that breakfast business, the capture, you often would find, I think it's going to find itself growing as well. And that trend we think is going to continue, given that people are not going to want to trouble themselves, at least in the initial months after the quarantine has been lifted, to going out and dining. So for that reason, we're going to focus really many of our clients on the cloud kitchen component.
I just had a question, Christy. We've been working on the ghost kitchen development for about 4 years now. One of the things that we find as a challenge, because we agree that we think it's going to be an important part of lifestyle, is the the bandwidth of food types that travel well. Chinese and pizza can kick it because they're good the next day. You can eat them out of the container. It's a natural. That's why it's been so strong. A lot of food doesn't make it, even with sophisticated packaging. We have dumpling containers that have vented tops, so you have the steam go. But I wonder, as restaurants develop those interesting takeout delivery, I think it's important to be mindful of what is it going to feel like when you get it in the house, eating it, out of a container or, putting it out. So I think there's going to be different phylums of sophistication. But for right now, I think it's an exciting time, and it is a good way to kind of expand on what we do traditionally.
Yeah, I mean, listen,
I think Julia had something
secondary.
to say. Sorry to cut you off, Stephen, but I wanted to get back to what Julia was saying.
Oh, I was just, I mean, I 100% agree that it's, with the gentleman that it's not, this isn't going back to normal. We're not going back, boutique hotels were always at the forefront of bringing sort of cool concepts and really lifestyle dining. And a lot of that had to do with density of seating. It had to do with sort of the environmental qualities. And its boutique is always very experiential, while a lot of the things that currently keep restaurants alive and, sort of delivery and cloud kitchens are really convenience driven. And I think that's a big dichotomy that the industry is going to have to sort of find a way through. Sort of how do you use the capacities with sort of repurposing part of your kitchens, and then how does it actually change? Like, what should you reopen in your properties versus what should maybe not reopen, become something else and be used differently, right? When should you do it? To what degree? What redesign is going to be necessary? How are people going to be comfortable to be in a space? I think having them packed three deep at the bar and people being like this together in sort of classic sort of New York tight dining, I don't think it's hysterics to say that people aren't going to be comfortable with that unless there's, really a change in the situation, a vaccine or some type of but I think there's just so much fear also where people are rethinking how they want to operate. And I think the guests will drive some of this. So what we're seeing a lot is people really, our clients that are really sort of forward looking are really, and have the capitalization to do it, are really thinking about, okay, how does that change our plans? How do we now use our real estate and our facility in a different way? And, there's no answers yet. There's no silver bullet. I think it's the start of that thought process of, and I think the sort of reusing of the facility as cloud kitchens is really smart, because you're looking at it and you're saying like, okay, I have this facility, it's there. How else can we generate revenue with it? Because you're also not going to see the numbers. You're not going to see those, $3,000 a square foot venues where it's really about density, because the density has to do not just with the seating, but that's also what drives the revenue per square foot. So all of these metrics are going to, and benchmarks are going to change going forward, in our opinion. How long that lasts, and if that sort of comes back to sort of a different user behavior at some point is unclear. But I think for the next 12 to 18 months, anything that's also in development that we're working on right now, there's a lot of shifting in design right now where we are revisiting, how do you set this up? Oh, I guess, community tables are no longer going to be so hot to trot. Buffets, there are certain standards that people are just used to are getting rethought on the fly right now.
Yeah,
and that was a tangent. I'm going to come back to it. So
I think, to Stephen's point, I think the genie is out of the bottle on a lot of this stuff, and diversification is something that people are going to have to consider. I mean, back when the world was young, I remember working in a 59-room boutique hotel, and we did fine dining in one space. We did room service, off-site catering, and the room service for the hotel next door. So I think the boutique segment is always positioned to be innovative and scrappy and think about
nimble.
New ways to make money and use the kitchen and use your facility in the way that is most beneficial to the bottom line. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of rethinking, and I'm not sure all of it's bad. I think, I was saying to the panel yesterday when we chatted about this discussion that, I went to a really amazing restaurant in town and had them put 3 courses in the back of my car. And I want to do that after this is over. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think there's a lot of new opportunities. And I think for the boutique segment, I think that there's, they can turn on a dime, and that's the advantage. The other advantage is, as the business comes back for the hotel segment, the economies level and mid-tier are doing not so bad. But the first thing that's going to come back is leisure travel. And that plays right into what's going on with the boutique segment. And there's an opportunity here to the time that you've got, diversify, and use your facility to make as much money as you can, and keep as much staff as you can and be relevant to the community.
And I think that's a good point. I mean, we're all sounding a little gloom and doomish because I think we're all looking around and it's sort of the wrap up of the initial triage. But I do think there is tremendous opportunity at the other end of that tunnel. I mean, we saw it after the last big financial crisis, where a lot of the big money basically went to the sidelines, parked it, and then sort of waited out and said, okay, how do we deploy it? And I think that's also, we saw a big boost in independent properties and sort of more sort of places that fall more towards the boutique sector, right? And I think you'll see something similar at the end of this, you know, or I don't know if it's not a straight line end, right? It's not like a hurricane or other crises. It's sort of this long meandering, you know, and very regional process, I would imagine. I don't think quarantines and stay-at-home orders are going to lift everywhere at the same time, right? It's sort of every region has a different curve. How that will develop, I think, will also be interesting to see. And how do, again, boutique, smaller, nimbler, can they react faster?
You know, and when we talk about the boutique sector with food, we're talking about dining. They were never really the place to go for fuel. It was not their thing. So as much as we're focused on providing meals, the intimacy and the social, emotional connection of going to a boutique hotel is what defined them. So we have to be careful. Conventional food production is never going to enhance the brand customer experience. So I think it's important that as they start to develop efficiencies and ways to evolve the dining, that it doesn't lose sight of, it was always meant to be effervescent. It was always meant to have a certain ethos. And I think, as Jay mentioned, creative and clever ideas have always been the hallmark of the boutique sector. So as they start to deal with dining, I don't know what the rest of the panel thinks, but I think it's important that we don't just start putting food in a bag, because that was never our role to begin with. And it was never why people sought out the boutique. There was much more affordable, efficient ways to get food always. But without that intimacy, without the mojo of having a crowded room with the music and all that environment, just food brought to someone's living room has a long way to go to reflect the brand.
And Jody, you talked about the mojo being driven largely by the team. So before we get into more of the opportunities, what are all of you advising as far as reactivating the workforce that's so crucial to the boutique space?
We're asking our clients to stay in touch and to provide whatever outreach programs they have, because a lot of the people who were special and had key posts were in the creative fields. They were artists or musicians or actors. And we don't know if during this time, because everything came to a pause, if they've further cultivated their career or if that also has been put on pause. But again, we don't know, but we're curious when the callback comes, how many of these people are still, in the fray and are willing to come back. Connecting with them, if there are tasks that provide income, obviously that helps. Also providing a family meal or a type of way for food to be prepared for the staff, at least, to be picked up and taken home. Some way of reinforcing that family sense that great restaurants and hotels curate over time. But I don't have a tangible way to lock them in. And part of their verve was always that they did have this kind of free style living. So it's going to be important to some brands more than others, but they were certainly the asset that we feel is going to be essential on relaunch.
David, part of the issue that I think arises now is that several folks are now seeing from the stimulus bill, from the PPP, they're receiving wires from the government, right? So whereby which, let's assume they receive $1 million per se for their business, which is 2.5 times the payroll. They're only able to provide 75% of that money towards their payroll. And they are also required to have 90% of their staff returned. Of that, 25% goes to occupancy expenses. So the real issue, if you take a poll of 100 restaurateurs today, is not necessarily when am I getting my money from the government? When I do receive it, how am I supposed to actually call back my entire staff? Whereby which the quarantine is still in existence. If it had not been in existence, and it's been lifted, how much of a suppression of sales are we going to see in the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months? So any suppression well beyond 25% of sales puts them underwater, right? And potentially bankruptcy. So the big thing is, hey, we now have the money to be able to reopen from the stimulus bill if we've applied and been accepted. We're now going to redeploy this for 2 months, those critical 2 months when we're paying our purveyors, paying some level of rent, and now we're open for business. How much business are we actually going to do? And if we don't do enough, we're now out of business again in 2 months, possibly 3 if we can string along that far. And ultimately, I think it's less about being in touch with the staff. I think all of those monikers of remaining in touch and finding things people to do and ensuring that you're continuing to develop a relationship with your staff is great. But the reality is we have to look at the other side of it and say, how are these businesses actually going to remain in business under these circumstances when they have to deploy that capital? And there's actually no good answer, and that's the unfortunate truth. And I think that's where the focus should be from the government, and that's where the focus needs to be on hotel owners. A lot of what we're telling hotel owners is, if you have a third-party food and beverage operator, help them along from a financial standpoint in bridging this gap, but in a slow and methodical manner. The notion of putting the lights on is not a good idea by any stretch, because we don't know what the demand's going to be. And so those are the things that I think cause us concern and keep me up at night is that.
Yeah. Stephen, my reading of the PPP was similar in that it's a little bit unfortunate the way it's written, that one, it's just 2.5 months. I think the industry is going back and looking for about 4 months of payroll, and then the ability to extend the use of that money throughout the rest of the year, so that it actually, as your business comes online, you can use the payroll money and extend it out. But that's not the way it was written. And so you're kind of in the position having to spend 90% of what you spent before for 25% of the business. And that doesn't, I mean, it's got a bunch of people standing around, and it doesn't really help unless you can deploy it in a different way. What I did understand was that it will only be forgiven if, the part that you use toward your staff, the rest of it you may have to pay back, but it's still capital in the near term. And then the other, the loans that have come in, the other ones that are part of the stimulus bill. But I thought it was oddly written and oddly restrictive for the funding.
Well, the timing is so difficult about it.
It's actually 2.5 times a payroll period. But the reality is, you're correct in saying that they now have to deploy that capital regardless. If not, it converts to a loan. And so regardless of how small the interest rate may be that the government's offering, you're effectively personally guaranteeing that loan. And so that will end up, you are now building debt onto a business that may not have the ability to cross the horizon. I think those are some of the issues that I think should be focused on by the government to a large extent. And that's where we have the greatest concern.
I think that's the timing question is really difficult in this. The other piece of labor is, just looking at the majority of people who work in the restaurants, right? They can't afford to sit around until the quarantines are lifted. So they're all looking for elsewhere. So whether they come back or not, quite frankly, it's almost like a judgment call on different operations culture. Everybody always talks about culture. This is a time where it's going to prove out as to who wants to come back to you and work for you and leave something else that they've found versus they're going to stay put and not take the risk. So I think there's so many different factors that sort of from, there's from the operator and the ownership side, then there's sort of, looking at the staff, sort of how they make it through. Because, 16.7 million people filing for unemployment and at least 3.5 million of that from our industry. That's, it's the labor market's going to shift. The last few years were absolutely a employees market where everybody, and I mean, the last time we were on the panel, everybody was sort of, Scott Gerber was like pulling his hair out because he's like, I cannot find people to save my life that are sort of, can do what we want them to do. And coming out of this, the market's going to be reversed. It's going to be a employer's market going forward. So, I mean, if we're looking for silver linings.
That is a silver lining, but I mean, how do you anticipate the hiring and rehiring process going, since you can't really tell what positions are going to be available, when they're going to be available, who's coming back to fill them?
I mean, it's the timing of the issue that's so difficult. We're working with a client right now on basically, we're looking at, okay, when do we start budgeting again? Are we assuming June 15th? Are we starting July 1st? How do we do this with our staff? How do you stay in touch? How many numbers do you start with? Because this isn't, you're not reopening and it is like it was before. Like Stephen said, there's going to be a demand suppression. You're going to have a different market coming in. So what business do you start with? Who do you staff with? And the difficulty, for all of us that have done many openings are hard. If you now have to do it, if you have an existing operation, you can't bring back your asset and capital of human labor, right? And your team, and you have to sort of essentially start from scratch. It's compounded and so much harder. So finding that balance, and I think staying in touch and figuring, keeping people posted of what you know and helping them as much you can through the process where they're stuck, I think will be helpful. But I mean, it's a big question mark. There's no, if you have a silver bullet, I'm all for it.
When we actually speak to restaurant owners that have portfolios of restaurants, assume 15 locations or more, they'll look at their portfolio, and often what they're telling us is that dinner-only restaurants are not necessarily something that they anticipate reopening in the coming months. All they're looking at today, from our understanding, is all-day restaurants, which I think bodes well for the boutique industry. Again, let's set aside the challenges that we discussed earlier, but when you think about all-day brasseries, American grills, diners, the likes, things that people can interact with on a daily basis, where they can pick up fresh bread and pastries and coffee, and there's a pickup component, there's a delivery component, and an all-day component, whereby which they're not relying as much on check average, but relying more so on volume, I think is where you're going to have the best opportunity for success. Because again, ultimately, you're going to have to be able to put bodies through the door, and I don't anticipate the full service dinner-only concept being the first thing that comes back. I mean, you've had Eric Repair quoted on it. You've had Wolfgang Puck quoting on it. You have Danielle Humus quoted on it. And I think they feel similarly. Is fine dining going to remain as it was? And absolutely not. Is it ever going to return? Question mark. My assumption is everything springs back at some point. But we think that all-day dining, to a large extent, would probably be the leader in that business.
You know what's interesting is the boutique hotel as a sanctuary. When people finally get out of their home, I'm curious if there's a surge for some of the socialization that they were craving. China already shows that right away there was a reconvergence. I'm not saying that it's wise, but I remember post 9/11, the build back was slow, and then it built a lot of momentum in the F&B portion of the hotel sector. So since boutiques were often a place for people to socialize, to join together, even under new conditions and whether they're wearing masks or sitting further apart, I wonder if the boutique sector might become one of the places where people start to reconvene, and whether that's going to be slow or a surge.
Yeah, I also think that there's an opportunity for, at least in the more knife and fork sit down dining, for families who've been quarantined together to go out in a way that they feel safe and be in a sort of a semi-private or private dining situation. It changes the service model dramatically, but for the knife and fork restaurant and for a boutique hotel, this could be an opportunity. We're also seeing a lot of the hotels in our market, a handful of them coming back with these either workspaces within the hotel, using the hotel as a, get away from the kids and the dog for a conference call, and do in-room dining, and just, spend the weekends not at home. And
maybe
I think
dining will make a profit finally.
What's that?
Maybe in-room dining will get popular enough to make a profit. Yeah.
Well, yeah, finally after never. But
that's a hard proposition.
Yeah. But I do think that those kinds of things, that, the fact that there's the guest room, there is a real experiential component to many boutique hotel guest rooms. Staying there becomes a respite, a getaway. I remember I was at the Inn at Little Washington after 9/11, and people didn't go to France. They went and they booked 5 rooms there. And so that was their vacation at the very upper end. So I think at the very, very top of the sort of dining and the upper luxury boutique segment, I think that you're going to see a lot of that, where people take over an entire inn, take over an entire relay, take over private dining. They want their family or the people that they've been with for the last 5 weeks or however long to come out and convene, and they feel that it's safe. It's just a question of, can these businesses accommodate them?
So speaking of the opportunities, I think the best place to start is, how are operators going to make people comfortable sleeping in their rooms again, or just being in a restaurant or a bar? Have you addressed that with your clients, messaging and training for the staff and letting guests know that they can be safe.
One thing that's available, we're even doing it for a takeout business, is a live feed camera to the kitchen demonstrating a style of work that's protective clothing. I mean, all we used to have to do was a hat, and that was like, part-time. But I think now having a glimpse into how food is prepared, how it's handled, the places that are simple and clean in design, I think will probably feel better at first. A cluttered tavern might be cause some concern. But I do think that helping the guests get a sense of your environment and how food is prepared will help them.
I think if you're transparent,
we've seen technology. I think a lot of folks are familiar with from Abbott Technologies, which is effectively like a thumbprint or a handprint. Not so dissimilar. If you were young and were going out to bars and nightclubs, you were getting ID'd. And the time it took for you to have somebody check your ID and flash a light, the UV light on your ID, is the same amount of time that we anticipate the testing will take in the future. And I think ultimately, for the world to come back in a substantial way, for people to have a real sense of comfort, to be able to go out to restaurants, bars, nightclubs, entertainment venues, I think ultimately you'll have to have the ability to ensure that each and every...
Steven, I think we lost you.
I think what Stephen was saying about entertainment venues, we're working with one right now, and they're struggling with, they're an indoor-outdoor venue, and they're struggling with, how do we let people reconvene, and to what degree can we, and how much space and how much density can we have, and what does that look like? And I think people need a plan for this, because there's going to be a paranoia. And I think that, you can get people back into an establishment. And to Jody's point, as long as you're transparent, we're not advocating that our people have cameras in the kitchen, but I think that's a very special thing that Jody does. But I do think as transparent as you can be about your cleaning processes, and as thorough you can be is essential.
I think there's the communication aspect. I think there's also the indirect communication. I think design is going to really play a big role. We all, statistically, the number one reason even before this that people are really number one thing that people were looking for in restaurants, but it was never sort of verbalized, but when they did the surveys found out, is cleanliness is a really big deal to people, which is why open kitchens have always worked so well, because there's the transparency of I can see things, etc. I think how design teams and owners and visionaries and so forth work through this notion of, okay, how do we make people comfortable in a new scenario until there is a vaccine, unless there is some type of antibody proof, unless there's sort of something that gives people the comfort to, okay, I'm still going to sidle back up to a bar and stand, 2 inches from a complete stranger. I think until that happens, there's going to be some interesting work to be done in terms of how do you design and how do you create spaces where people have a sense of comfort to go there, right? I think it's sort of, if you go into the very high-end boutique space and you can rent out whole inns, I think those are interesting things and sort of, can bring some of that comfort back, but that's a really small slice of the pie of the industry, right? What happens in all the other sort of middle fields, because boutique isn't necessarily all just sort of at the 5-star level. It's also about sort of size and intimacy and sense of place. So I think sort of how designers and design firms can respond and work with people like us and owners and operators on coming up with solutions that create comfort without sort of, it's not sort of the overt, we hold a sign up and, but sort of what are some of the aspects you can do that really will give people the comfort to go back out. So when they go back out, you can sort of build it piece by piece and you don't go back in and it's sort of, the craziness that happened outside of Carbone for a couple of nights where there was the pickup and everybody was too close and the police had to break it up. And, I think those are sort of the things to avoid. And how do you build into the new operations that open a sense of comfort and safety is going to be interesting, and something, we're working on 2 projects right now. And sort of are in the middle of. So I think in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, as things sort of start percolating, it's going to become clearer what some of these options are.
We had 2 questions actually that play into this, and that's that's one that's does the panel anticipate the design differences and trends changing for different parts of the U.S.? Will there be as much of a change in a secondary city versus a higher density city like New York City? And there's another question that plays with that also is, do you all think there's a better opportunity for resort markets more so than urban environments when things start to return to a sense of normalcy?
Yes. I think space becomes the luxury. I think in New York it already is, sort of to a degree, when you go somewhere that is really spacious, that comes with a different price tag. I do think secondary markets are, people are going to think twice of, do I move into a really high densely building in New York City, or, maybe the suburbs don't look so bad after all. I do think, I don't know if that's sort of a momentary shift out of sort of some of the semi-panic that's happening, or if that's a long-term development, but I would just logically expect something like this.
I think
to show
that's
some
key.
resonance.
It's key to know about the timing of it, because if you develop long-term solutions that are dealing with a short-term mindset, hotels move slowly. So by the time they get a redevelopment in place, they always have to be really mindful. When we're doing trending and looking at future market appeal, it changes a lot. We live in a very quick-moving society. So I think we have to also be careful to measure the initial impact versus what it will be 6 months from now. Will January still warrant the same things? Because if you build the model that's reactionary right now, you may find yourself short in the upcoming. Our pattern has been to recover quickly and to move and to develop, the armor it takes to live another day. So I think we all have to watch it and be careful not to do something so extreme to the moment that as things start to round off, we're limited.
I think tertiary markets, are going to rebound quite a bit quicker. I also think that gateway cities on the other end are not going to rebound as quickly, unfortunately, because of that density you speak of. I do believe that the ability to drive to a location and vacationing to a large extent, and what I think people have referred to as staycations and otherwise, I think people are going to be willing to drive longer distances to have those experiences. I think ultimately getting on a plane is something that everybody's going to do, right? Today, you're going to see the TSA has 100,000 people a day going through, whereas usually across the U.S., you have a little over 2 million people that are going through. Naturally, those numbers will rebound, right? Maybe not to the same levels, maybe they will, but the reality is if somebody's traveling very often for vacation, for leisure, et cetera, I do think that you're going to see a pullback, not only because it's difficult and daunting and maybe a little bit terrifying to get on a plane in the future, but the reality is that financially you're going to find that you have over 11 million people that are unemployed. How many of those folks are going to be able to get their jobs back after the quarantine is lifted? And I do not necessarily believe that the greater majority will, unfortunately, regardless of the quarantine. So I think to a large extent, I think rural markets will benefit. I think tertiary markets will benefit to a large extent. And I think that there's hotels are going to develop, specifically boutique hotels, will be thoughtful in creating a resort-like experience within their own venues, and to ensure that people are willing to drive 2 to 4 hours to visit them and stay by them and enjoy them. And I wouldn't be surprised to a large extent if this, not quarantine, but the effects of it will last well over the next 12 months.
Yeah, I think you're going to see, Stephen, to your point, a sliding scale of paranoia depending on where you were during the crisis and how much it impacted you. I think people coming out of New York, there's going to be a lot more concern and worry and things than, some people in the more rural sets where whole swaths of the country weren't really affected or touched by this yet. And I do think we're seeing it across the country, but it's still, if you're in, Jackson Hole, it's probably going to feel a lot different than if you're in LA. And I think that residual paranoia is going to be reflected in how these secondary and tertiary cities recover, and they're likely more liable to recover more quickly in markets like Nashville and Chattanooga and things like that than you're going to see, I think, in the big cities, at least for leisure travel.
You might see also more of a built-in self-service or guest interactive type service. We were going there earlier, mostly because of the dearth of available people, as our friend Scott mentioned. There's really a shortage of finding talent in the front house in particular, and for the boutique sector where they have to have a certain cachet, it's become near impossible. So as we started to evolve concepts that involve the guest being more involved, I think we sold the idea as this is a lifestyle component, but it was also out of necessity. maybe now that can also provide a sense of comfort or distance for people if food is able to be, if they're more involved in the service so they have less interaction.
And as we 10 minutes here, so I just want to touch on asking you, the whole panel, are there any opportunities, I would say, I don't want to say the word excited, but that you're interested in, that you're developing with your clients right now in anticipation of a new normal?
So
We're advising. Go ahead.
Please, no, go ahead, please.
We're advising our people that we're working with right now is we talked about earlier, diversification. And while I think Jody's very, very prescient in saying that you don't want to build the church for Easter Sunday and do a bunch of crazy stuff right now that will not make sense in a bunch of months, I just think that again, the industry is changing, and retail, food retail coming out of restaurants is a thing that's happening. And I saw this very innovative idea from Wow Bao that they're going to sell the franchise for their thing out of a ghost kitchen anywhere. And there's a lot of this innovation that's happening. And so I think that that's a positive thing for the industry. I think diversification, I think maximizing things without damaging the integrity of the experience that you're creating for your core customers, but maximizing the revenue you can make from your building as a whole, I think is a smart thing. I think you're going to see a lot more of that creativity coming out in the next few months. And I think that if there is a silver lining, I think it's this innovation and this breaking down of these barriers that we've always said, well, we can't do that. Of course you can. I mean, we can't deliver food to, our full meals to someone to take home. Well, of course you can. And now you have to. It may be a good habit to stay into because you've learned how to do it when you're surviving. We can't sell our food in grocery stores. Well, yeah, you can. And so I think that what's great about this is that people are having to do behaviors that seemed completely foreign before and may be a fantastic business model opportunity moving forward. And not everybody can do it, and it's hard, and there's logistical and service challenges to it all. But I think that this requirement to find new and creative ways to do business and to maintain your bottom line to some degree and survive is going to generate a lot of interesting mashups and blends and creative ways of thinking about food service as a whole.
I think the grocery component is very interesting. You're going to see it, I think, in two ways. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
Sorry about that. So I think you're going to see it in two different in two different paradigms. One, I think you're going to find the notion of the grocer and grab and go start to evolve into the boutique hotel space within the food and beverage. The notion of a pickup is really going to evolve in a dramatic way, and people being able to, in a contactless way, be able to develop what they want as a meal, if you will. I think that's first and foremost. I also think you're going to see it, not necessarily for this panel, but overarching, I think you're going to see a huge evolution within the grocery and supermarket space in creating grab and go, as well as even potentially sit down or casual dining within that realm. And that's something I think big box retail and grocery is going to benefit from this shift to a large extent, not only from an increase in sales, but an evolution of their food and beverage offering. A la carte dining is something that many in that space have tinkered with, and I think you're going to see that evolve. But I do think outside of cloud kitchens, there are going to be others and ideas that are created, but we do believe to a large extent that cloud kitchens are really, for us, the silver bullet that's going to be able to, in the near term, assist hotels.
I think there's also, if the boutique is defined by anything, it's defined by a reflection of lifestyle. So as lifestyle takes on a new face, I think it's incumbent on the boutique to reflect that through their F&B. And there was initially even a campaign to start this grocery store, to your room, even for a picnic in your room or whatever it may be. So I think finding ways to expand is going to be important, but finding the style and the manner in which it's done is going to be important as well to maintain some sense of brand fortification. If what is unique about boutiques becomes too flat-footed in its effort to survive or accommodate, I think the genre then will suffer. So it's important to find that creativity, those special minds that have always been kind of a curiosity and an entertainment aspect, and bring it to food in a new dimension.
Hey, Julie, is there an opportunity that you're excited about? It sounds like design and real estate, but is there another opportunity?
Well, I think the gentlemen have covered quite well. I do think the notion of how do you sort of put more sort of get different revenue centers activated within the boutique space, right? Sort of as for example with the cloud kitchens and sort of cover different aspects. I think what we see is that it's not just within the operation, but the pressure on all industries is bringing out some interesting things. If you look at what some of the suppliers are doing, the suppliers, a lot of their distribution networks, basically all of their end clients are gone, right? So you see suppliers, see Ball Door, greens, vegetables, et cetera, delivery all over Long Island. And, you see Hoboken Farms putting together a distribution network. And they're really sort of looking at, okay, we've got hospitals, we no longer have catering and restaurant companies. And it's sort of, they're looking to go like, how do we go straight to consumers? How do we now package and put together? And I think that's sort of one of those things where you're going to see some density of offerings going towards the end consumer. I also think there's going to be less money to go around and less money spent on food, whether it's delivered or in some way, shape, or form produced out of house or consumed out of house. So not just is the number of operations getting smaller, it's also the money spent is getting smaller, right? So I don't want to go back to doom and gloom, but it's usually, what opportunities there will be lots of opportunities coming out of this, because they always come out of pressure situations, and they come when there's such a large shift, because, necessity is the mother of invention. What do we do? How do we do it? We've seen it in the last month, people doing restaurants, people doing delivery. You never thought they would do delivery, people shutting down their restaurants and opening temporary other ones. Sort of like the guys Panelists did in Seattle. There's lots of, for me right now, there isn't enough clarity to tell you what exactly the opportunity is. We see it in New York. I think if in New York you really want to get into the restaurant space and you've got money on the sideline and you want to wait a couple of months and start looking at really good real estate and seeing rents drop for the first time in a very long time, there's some opportunities there, but that's sort of more generic. Sort of what segment will benefit? I think the mid-level. I think fine dining, it will, of course, re-emerge in some way, but I think the price points will, there'll be less people who have that kind of money to spend. So in what segment between, that remains experiential and isn't purely convenience driven, how that re-emerges, I think that's the opportunity. If you can figure out how to do a place that's experiential and perceived as safe, that's sort of where some interesting things I think will happen. How those will happen, I can't tell you. My crystal ball isn't clear enough for that at this point.
Understood. Would we all like to give our final message now that we're wrapping up? Hopefully something hopeful, but starting with, let's go with Jay.
Again, as I mentioned, I think that there's enormous amount of innovation and creativity coming out of this. And I think that, again, the genie's out of the bottle, and it shouldn't go back in a lot of ways. And I think there is a correction coming in the market. There's going to be less dining seats. There's going to be, a long slog back. But I think that, with the diversification and really creative thinking and the immediate pivots that boutiques can provide, I think that there's a lot of hope for that segment. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to really rethink, what it means to eat and drink in the world today. So I'm very hopeful coming out of this. It's going to look very different, but it's still going to be amazing. And I think it's still going to be very experiential, and the boutique segment is going to do great.
Jody?
I think restaurateurs have always been scrappers. They deal with adversity and challenge all the time, whether it be cash flow or changes in market. So I think they've got the backbone to apply themselves to this. And I think, moreover, what we've learned through this whole crisis has been a sense of community and how people come together. And I think the boutique sector in particular has always been about people, and it's way beyond lodging. It transcends that. So as we come back online, I think it's important to show that warmth and that humility. I think the consumer is certainly feeling humbled, and this is an opportunity to have kind of a gentle sanctuary role for us as we emerge. And I think restaurant people will survive this.
And Stephen?
I share the sentiment with many of the panelists today. I think that, moreover, that you have innovation and you have unique perspectives that are brought forth on the boutique hotel lifestyle space that I think are going to really impress the world in a lot of ways. I think that food and beverage is not only remains integral as part of the hotel ecosystem, but become even more important today than they were a year, 2 years, 10 years ago. And you couldn't put a panel like this together 10 years ago. And I think that shows how strong food and beverage is part of this, the fabric of hotels. And so for that, we're grateful. I think that restaurateurs are tenacious, and I think they're incredibly thoughtful. And ultimately, I think the business model will improve over time. And hopefully we will learn to be able to work within the sandbox in which we're given, and ultimately end up on a positive note on the other side. So I think ultimately things will work themselves out, but I do think that it'll be a tough ride there.
And Julia, do you have a final message?
Yeah, no, I think we all concur that at the end of this somewhat grim tunnel, there's lots of opportunity, right? I think it's sort of trying to figure out, I think for those operators, and operators at heart are scrappy, and we also deal with something that is the ultimate social connector for, I want to say millennia, but it's true, but people, you break bread, you have a drink together, that's sort of how people connect. And I don't think that's going to go away. I just think it's going to take a different shape. I think for operators who can figure out, how do I pivot what I have into something that's resonant to the new market that's emerging, right? How is my local area changing? How do I address that? How do I do something that's resonant to them? How do I really tighten up my operation and figure out how to provide a sense, not just of comfort, but safety to guests, and really sort of have those new elements worked in? And then how do you execute that and pull it back together? I think there's great opportunity there, because I think there's going to be a larger rate of closures than there will be a reduction in demand. And in that might be some good opportunity ahead. And I think if you're smart about it, and Sharp and the boutique guys have always been on the forefront of sort of lifestyle restaurants and exciting restaurants, you can give great opportunities to the right partners to put something fresh together.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for taking the time to participate in this panel for this webinar, and thank you for everyone who took the time to join.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. To all of our panelists, we call you guys boutique educators. Great minds coming together, continuing the dialogue. This is what it's all about, and this is how we'll recover. So first of all, thank you to all of our panelists, our amazing moderator, and thank you to all the attendees for taking time today to listen. It's all about listening right now and learning what to do, what are our next actions. So thank you to everyone. And also, if you ever have any questions, please email our association at info@blla.org. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. I sound like a blogger, but hit that subscribe button because we're going to be producing a lot of content, including these recordings and more episodes and series, things like that. And of course, please hashtag Boutique Strong and hashtag Save Boutique Hotels. Thank you, everyone, so much. Goodbye.